All right. So, last week we ended with a conversation about this verse right here. Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Do you remember the more appropriate translation of it? Yeah, pull your notes. Cease striving, which also was a phrase used about war. Stop fighting your own battles and know that I am God. This is a perfect segue into the first of the means of grace / spiritual disciplines we're going to talk about. But first, I need to just, come clean and say there are times you talk about things that you don't know about. There are times you talk about things that you've already gone through. And then there are times you talk about things that you just have to admit, I'm still in the midst of this. I am still struggling with pieces of this. Because the reality is, as we talk about rhythms of rest, rhythms of life, you probably already know that that's a bit of a challenge in my life. Years ago, we went to this church conference that was in Dallas, Texas, and our worship pastor at the time, it was the thing. Like, oh my gosh, you've got to go see this. Every conference, they would have a night before where they would have what they call a habitation service, which was functionally like they'd come up and they would say, we don't know what those Spirit's going to do. Like the conference is planned out, but tonight we're just going to see what the Spirit does. And the elders of the church would come up on stage, and whatever they felt prompted, that's what would happen. And so the year before we went, they had this night where the pastor and one of the elders would stand up there. Okay, I'm feeling the Spirit lead. So somebody in here's got a student loan issue. Who is it? Oh, okay, this person raised their hands. All right, somebody right now is being led to pay for that. Who is it? And somebody else would raise their hand. They'd be like, all right, you two talk to each other. Somebody here needs a vehicle. Oh, okay, it's this person. And they'd tell their story, single mom, blah, blah, blah. Somebody in here has a vehicle. They've been waiting for God to tell them to give away. Who is it? Oh, it's that person. You go talk to each other. Like it was this crazy thing. So we had, this interesting anticipation around the service. And we went to the habitation service, and I was waiting for them to say that, okay, who has student loans? And it's going to be like... And instead, that night it was like, hey, we believe God has a word for, okay, here's yours. So it was interesting, though, because I come from a background, we'll talk about this in some of the later sessions, but I come from a background where my church experience was great, but I had some experiences visiting, so to speak, with some others where I was very cautious of movements of the Spirit, so to speak. And before this event happened, before this habitation service happened, the pastor sat down with everybody in the audience and said, here's what the Bible says about words of knowledge, about prophecy, about this. Here's how it describes an orderly experience, because the Spirit is not chaos. The Spirit is ordered. And he kind of talked back to, like, if you look in the book of Genesis, before God brings it all together, it's the chaos waters. It's this disorganized mess. And God comes in and he says, there is night, there is day, there is seasons, there is separation of land and sea. He organizes all this. So all of that prepared my heart for when the pastor said something else. Because at that conference, they just so happened to be talking about Sabbath and rest. That was the theme. And there was 4,000 pastors there. So you could tell how well that went off. But the pastor said something that I will never forget. It still impacted me to this day. He said, biblically, the person who will not work is called lazy. The person who will not rest is called disobedient. And that was like a oof that I've never fully let go of, but I also wrestle with it. And I will say I'm better in my rhythms of rest before I get going with this. But there is another common saying out there: if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. There you go. I was like, yeah, the devil can't make you bad. He'll make you busy. He will try and get us to take hold of doing it our own power, our own way, not stopping, not recognizing that God is the one who fights our battles. And instead of us being still or cease striving, stop going to war, stop trying to fight your own battles, I am the Lord, we try to take it into our own hands. Now, I mentioned creation. God separated the waters. He created order out of the chaos monster. That was the original bad guy in Genesis, if you read it through a Hebrew lens, the chaos monster. So, quick question for you. When was the command to work given? Was it before or after the fall of man? Just give me some popcorn. I just want your initial thoughts. Don't think too hard about it.
Before.
Before? After? Those are your options. Okay, hold that thought. Before. So the answer is before. Before the fall of man, God gave Adam jobs to name creation, to work the ground. Now, before the fall, the ground produced its harvest. It wasn't difficult. But the command to work was before the fall. It's a part of God's good order that we have purpose and that we work. What happened in the fall was the ground was cursed so that it would produce thickets and it would not produce its fruit easily. So the fall, remember how we talked about how the fall of man impacted creation itself? This is where it most impacted us back directly, because in an agrarian society where it used to be easy to go tomatoes, boom, now we have to work at it. And we've continued to have to work at it for thousands and thousands of years. So here's where the rhythms of grace become so important. We're not just talking about Sabbath. We're talking about how God ordered the world to work. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he declared it good. So among that thing that he declared good is work. Work is ordained by God to give us purpose, to partner us with him, to give us a path forward. However, we often turn work into, or turn our purpose into, a God. We often turn the thing that was supposed to serve us into something that we serve. And so we're going to talk about rest. At that same conference, the pastor was, by the way, it's a church of, I think at the time it was like 30,000 people, something like that on a regular basis. And he started talking about some of the rules that he has for his team that are unbreakable. I'm going to cough. Excuse me. One of them was that all of his staff is required, and gets a little struggle when you get into legalism on it. He mentioned that about it. All of his staff was required to have a Sabbath and a day off. And everybody went, wait a second. So biblically, we could get on board with the whole conversation about Sabbath. We're going to talk about what that is here in a minute. But what are you talking about? You have to have a Sabbath and you have to have a day off. Well, he said, well, if you don't have a Sabbath and a day off, your Sabbath day gets spent catching up on the dishes, mowing the yard, doing the laundry, and you don't actually ever Sabbath. You just work from home instead of working at your job. But God was clear, again, the words he said, the person in the Bible describes as lazy who won't work, but the person who will not rest is described as disobedient. So we look at a rhythm of grace where God designed the world around work and rest. Where we tend to get it wrong is in our American 24/7 nonstop world. We work until we drop, and then we take a day off, which includes laundry, the groceries, the whatevers. But at least we stop from that, and then we pick ourselves back up and we go to it again. If you look at what God described in his rhythms of grace, we're actually meant to be restored and renewed one day a week, Sabbath, which is then meant to feed us and propel us into good work for the rest of our week. So in God's economy, you don't rest from your work, you work from your rest. And that alone, that little change, could revolutionize our entire schedule system, right? Where we don't crash out at the end of the week or the end of the whatever because we just never stopped going. But we recognize that God intended us to enter into seasons, moments, and especially once a week, time of restoration that fills us so that we can go and do good work. So, in the Hebrew system, the Sabbath, which by the way is written into the Ten Commandments, it's a pretty important thing in God's book. It's written into the earliest stages of creation. The Sabbath was turned by the Pharisees into a very legalistic system. If you read through the New Testament, you will see Jesus and the disciples constantly butting up against the Pharisees, where somebody picked a head of grain on the Sabbath. Somebody walked too far on the Sabbath. Somebody pulled a donkey out of a ditch or healed a hand on the Sabbath. And that's where Jesus, I misplaced the donkey story, because that's where Jesus said, well, who of you, if your donkey falls into a ditch, wouldn't go and pull him out on the Sabbath anyway? Is that work? Or is that just you taking care of things? And he said these words, man was not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. The Pharisees turned it into a legalistic rule where you had to rest. You were forced to rest in a very specific way on a very specific day. And if you did not, you were going to hell. Would have been Gehenna for them, Hades at least. Jesus came in and said, no, God designed the Sabbath as a blessing, as a gift to you. It's not about you better rest or else. It is about be still and recognize that I am God. That if you can't stop for just one day, maybe you think the world depends on you instead of it depending on me. The Sabbath is meant to be a gift. Joyfully rest as unto the Lord. So, what is a Sabbath? Well, Sabbath is, by definition, a day of rest. To Shabbat is to pull away from the needs of the world. Now, our Jewish friends will still sometimes fall under more of a Pharisaical take. If you've ever had Jewish friends who can't cook on the Sabbath, who can't turn on or off their lights on the Sabbath, who, even when I used to sell appliances, your stove has Sabbath mode so that you could set it in advance to take care of those things. So, I was going to say, just hit the button on the side, it'll stop. So the Sabbath gets turned into oftentimes a you must do this or else, which is the Pharisees' version of you were made to honor the Sabbath, not the Sabbath was made to honor the rhythm of God. Because here's the thing, if you look at the creation story, in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth. And then on the seventh day, he rested. Do you think God needed to rest? I think he could have taken care of things and kept going. He is unlimited. But he set an example for us that even the Creator knows when to stop creating. Because when you don't stop, even those things that are meant to be created as good oftentimes turn into obligations, destructions, distractions, idolatry. That's a good word for it right there. So the Sabbath is meant to be a day of rest to recharge you in the others. So if God established a 6-in-1 system, why do we often work on 5 and 2 or 4 and 3 or whatever? I mean, again, it's man-made calendar stuff, right? But if you work a 5 and 2 schedule, I would highly recommend, not as like a thou shalt, but as a this is good practice. Have one day that is your I'm going to do the chores day. And have one day that is the I'm not doing anything day. Now, what counts as Sabbath? What counts as rest? Again, this is not legalistic. The Pharisees had a system where if you walked a certain number of steps, you broke the Sabbath. If you did a certain number of things, you broke the Sabbath. Like, it's not what Jesus is going for to say, oh, if you mow the yard on your Sabbath, you are breaking the law of God. In fact, back when I was teaching something similar to this in Ohio, my buddy Kyle actually said, see, he was a creative, so he spent all day, like he made advertisements for McDonald's and for Kroger, which is King Soopers here, and things like that. So all day he was working with his mind. So on his Sabbath day, he actually enjoyed mowing the yard because he could just take his mind off and just push. Now for me, that would not be restful. It's not something that I enjoy doing, mowing the yard, etc., doing the dishes, etc. But you and how God has wired you. If it's something you would do because it's your day of work, it's probably not for your day of rest. It doesn't have to be, okay, that day we can't have any electronic devices, we can't go travel, we can't go, it doesn't have to be, oh, if we don't go to the mountains, we failed. A Sabbath is one day to just spend time with God. Yourself, to rest, to play a game, to read a book, to spend time with friends, to whatever. And when you create that as a regular rhythm of rest, you start to feel life come back into you from it. So this is why I like that pastor's statement about the 5 and 2. Because when you treat your Sabbath day as a day to catch up on all your chores, what happens at the end of it? Like, I can't wait to get back to work. It's actually less work. Oh, right? But when you create that boundary to say, you know what? If the dishes don't get done today, God's still king of the universe. It frees your soul to actually rest. To say, I'm going to turn my phone off, and if the most important contract we have at work falls apart, God has still got this. If they can't do it for a day without me, probably something is out of order. And if I can't do for a day without that, probably something in my heart needs to be examined again, because it's probably idolatry. So a Sabbath is a day, but what day? Here's where there's some disagreements. Some still hold that the Shabbat should be biblically Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. That would be your Sabbath. Friday night to Saturday night, functionally. It got moved for a lot of people to Saturday, which is why you kind of have the old school American system where nobody worked on Saturdays or Sundays because Saturday was the Jewish Sabbath, Sunday's the Christian Sabbath. We protected those days. You had blue laws. Anybody remember blue laws? Businesses were not legally allowed to be open on Saturdays or Sunday under blue laws because those were the Sabbath days. Those were the days of rest. Stores weren't open. Some remember that. Yeah, now it's actually going back towards that more so, just in the fact that, like, even if you look at like Black Friday and things like that, how they created Brown Thursday, which used to be called Thanksgiving, and how stores were open nonstop, and now, like, Black Friday, they're like, we're going to open Friday at 6 a.m. Leave us alone until then. Like, that kind of is at least moving back in the right direction, because we recognized we took all margin away and people started going nuts. Try having no margin in your lives. It doesn't work. There's even biblical evidence in it that spills into things like graphic design. Do you know there's a rule that you don't put anything in what they call the gutter on a page or on a screen? Because if things are pressing to the edges, it makes your mind go, oh, it's too busy. It's too busy. And yet we don't see that in our own lives. When everything presses to the edge, that we're too busy. And we're not just busy, we're disobedient. Because ultimately what that's saying is, God can't handle my life. I will take it from here, thank you. So it's a day. But what day? Personally, I fall under I'm going to live under grace and not the rule of the law. And so I don't strictly hold to Saturday as the only day you can have as a Sabbath. It does work out right now in my life that Saturday is my Sabbath. Technically, actually, I start my Sabbath Friday when I get done with work, and I go till Saturday. So I actually hold a very Hebrew Sabbath schedule right now. But I haven't always. You know, I've worked jobs where Saturday is the busiest of your days. You're not getting that off. And so Monday was often my Sabbath. I don't think God cares that it's a very, very specific day as much as that you are very specifically letting go of the idols that tell you you can't stop, or it's going to fall apart, or it's all going to fail if you don't rest. So I always just say, pick a day. Just pick a day. Whatever works with your schedule. And if you have 2 days off from work, make one of them the day you do your chores. And the other day, when your spouse says, honey, we got to do the dishes, they'll still be there tomorrow. We have got to rebalance the budget. That's important, yes. That sounds like a Monday problem. What we've got to do right now is rest. Because without rest, we do not find restoration.
What's that?
Yeah, exactly, right? So, that's what Sabbath is. It is intentional day where we cease striving and know that He is God. So what is it you do on that day? Anything that brings you rest. If mowing the yard brings you rest, truly, and you're not just trying to sneak one in on God and say, oh no, this is actually what brings me rest, God. Oh, I'm getting things done. No, if that's actually what brings you rest, go mow the yard. That's great. I wouldn't say working spreadsheets, balancing your budget, anything that's pretty close to what you do for a job anyway, doing the dishes. Like, unless you just actually say, man, I can't, if I had my perfect vacation, I would do the dishes every day. That's probably not it, right? But if you use that filter of, if I had my perfect vacation where nobody could bother me that I didn't want bothering me, where nothing needed done except for what I wanted to do, what would you do on that vacation? That probably gives you a hint as to what your Sabbath rest should look more like. That being said, let's talk about the historical Sabbath. I mentioned the Jewish Shabbat, Friday night into Saturday morning. Anybody know what happens Saturday morning for an Israelite family? Synagogue. That's the day you go to church, right? Now, as Christians, we took that day and moved it very early on in the life after Jesus world to Sunday. Why? Sunday is the Lord's day. It's the day he resurrected. So we were like, that's the day that we're going to pick for that. And so Sunday became the Sabbath in Christian calendar. Friday into Saturday, the Shabbat for the Jewish calendar. But either way, what defined that day was worship. Now, I will say, the worship service that the early church had or that the Israelites had was fairly different than what we do on Sunday church, although a lot of the elements are still there. There's singing. The apostles taught, or somebody stood up and read from a scroll. There was fellowship. All of those things in some form that we do were done as a part of the Sabbath. And here's an important thing to note. Jesus had rhythms. You'll notice it says Jesus got away. He went by himself to a high mountain and he prayed. Oftentimes in the most devastating and busiest moments. John the Baptist is beheaded. Jesus goes off by himself and prays. The crowds are coming in and there's hundreds and thousands of people asking for his time. Jesus goes away by himself to be with God. Jesus had a rhythm of rest. Jesus also had a rhythm where he went to synagogue. Every Saturday, Jesus would be found in a synagogue. Now think about this. Have you ever had one of those or watched one of those videos where there's like a cover band playing a song and then the original artist like pops up on stage and is like, "Good job, guys, you did great." If you haven't seen them, they're fantastic. Just Google them. Like Aerosmith, Steven Tyler is very common to do that. Ed Sheeran shows up all the time where people will be covering his songs and he'll just step in front of the audience and go, "That was so good. It was so good." And they're like, "Oh dear Lord, he's right here. What's happening?" Right? They're fun videos. They're like, photo bombs of a variety, right? So imagine this. If there was any one person who could say, "I really don't need to go to church. I've read that book," probably would be Jesus, right? How many times do you think Jesus was sitting there listening to someone who exposited from the scrolls and he was like, "You have heard that it was said, but I say unto you," right? And yet, Jesus made it a habit, a part of his holy rhythm, that big part of his Sabbath was spent in community with the church. He also got away by himself, but that was an unmissable part of his, what we would do Sunday mornings, but for them Saturday mornings. I have heard people say, "Well, I don't need to gather as the church because my church is in the mountains." Our friend Ann, who used to run our AV here and stuff, she said, "I recently heard somebody say," this a few years ago, so it was recent to that conversation, "I recently heard somebody say, I would rather be in the mountains thinking about God than be at church thinking about the mountains." I was like, interesting. And then that other part of me went, but Jesus was often in the mountains. That's where he gave a whole sermon. And yet his mind was always on the church. It was always on the people of God. So part of a Sabbath, now you could take this, if you have a 5 and 2 schedule, 5 days on, 2 days off, you could take this to be, well, my church day is a little bit busy, so I'm going to I'm going to put my mow the yard day after church, and Saturday is going to be my Sabbath. For a person like myself, I don't get to take Sunday as a Sabbath. If I don't work on Sunday, then somebody else better be up here. Thank you, Chandras. But it's just like I'm not breaking the Sabbath by preaching on Sunday mornings, but I do recognize I need to have a Saturday rest. However, Jesus made engaging the church on the Sabbath a vital part of his rhythm. See Luke 4:16 if you want to take a look at it. And so while Jesus did this, he then passed on to his disciples, hey, I do this, so here's what you do as well. And if you look in the book of Acts, you see an early church that also prioritized gathering in worship together, gathering as the church. Now, that's a discussion for another time, but you get what I say when I say we're not going to church, we're gathering as the church. Like that's another scriptural discussion, but physically, the focus wasn't going to a specific building. In fact, the word church actually comes from the German word Kirche, which is a poor substitution for what the Bible actually used for that word. The word in the Bible was ekklesia. Ek meaning out, and kaleo meaning call. So the called out ones. It was the gathering of the church. But biblically, the Bible does not know, it's just me and God in the woods. That is not shown as the pattern of Jesus, the habit of the church across history, or what God speaks into recommending. So it's not about the building, but it is about gathering as the church. So the early church in the book of Acts, it says in Acts 2:42 and 46, what's the word there? They devoted. How do you devote yourself to something? You show up.
Make it your first priority.
Make it your first priority. So maybe you could say you reorient everything else around that. Yeah. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple and broke bread house by house. So now the early church took the Sabbath thing and said, every single day we're going to church. That was a little bit different story. But historically, outside of that initial movement of the Holy Spirit in Acts, there's been one day that we devote to being and gathering as the church. So whatever form of worship you might argue about, whether it's got to be hymns or it's got to be King James or it's got to be, in a building or out in the park or what, none of that really actually gets to the heart of it. The heart of it is they gathered together as the church in worship, studying the apostles' teachings, fellowshipping, serving, and growing. So if you look at those basic elements, that's typically what most churches are trying to do on a Sunday or throughout the week. So if we were to devote ourselves, that means that we start to reflow other things. Oops, I went one too far. So I'm going to tell a story, and in this one, I'm the good guy, but I promise you it's not like this all the time. But this isn't hey, I got it all figured out. It's just I happen to get this one thing mostly right. But my very first big boy job, I had worked as a busboy, I had worked as a grocery store bagger, and then I got hired on at Sears, Roebuck and Company, which back in the day, that was a big deal. I got hired to sell electronics and appliances at the Amazon of the 1900s, right? It truly was. If you look at Sears' catalog back in the day, you could order your house from Sears and it would come shipped down on a truck. They sold cars, They sold chickens. They sold, well, the softer side of Sears for a certain generation will remember when they went all in on selling clothing. They sold Craftsman tools. That was the only place you could get Craftsman tools back in the day. Kenmore appliances. I mean, it legitimately was the Amazon of its day, and it busted and went belly up. But either way, I worked at Sears. And I was young enough and bold enough at that point where when they offered me the job, I said, that's fantastic. I have one condition. And they were like, whoa, that's not how this works. We make the conditions, you get hired. I was like, cool, think that if you want to. If I'm going to work here, I will not work Sundays. I'm like, well, we can't promise that. You're probably going to end up working Sundays. I said, you weren't listening. If I am going to work here, I will not work Sundays. Are we clear? They were like, oh, well, we'll see. In 7 years of working at Sears, I worked like 2 Sundays. Because I'm not pig-headed. I'm not going to pull my weight at times when things come up. But I made it very clear, like, other people can work on Sunday. I'm not going to. Because my priority was gathering as the church. And I would rather not make money. Again, I was a teenager. I didn't have bills. So I'm not saying I could do this again today, However, last year, well, I guess now almost 18 months ago, when we as the elders were talking about me taking on another job and when it became clear it was going to be with the police department, like that was one job where I couldn't go to them and say, actually, everybody else can work Sundays. I'm not working Sundays, right? We just literally put it into God's hands and said, you got to work this out because what if? But in every other case aside from that, when I've worked somewhere, aside from the church, because again, it'd be really weird if I told my elders, I'm not going to work Sundays. You guys can figure that out. That'd be a different story. But aside from working for the church and working as a police officer, I have had a rule with any employer. I'm sorry, if you want me to work here, I won't work Sundays. Now, you don't need me to work here, that's fine. We can part ways and be friends, but I'm very clear on my boundary, and that's it. I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but I am saying, what would it look like if your life mirrored the life that Jesus taught his early church to live? And you said, actually, that experience of gathering together in worship, that is an unmovable rock. Have you ever seen the illustration where you take a vial of some sort and first you put in sand, then you put in pebbles, and then you try to fit bigger rocks in there and just like it doesn't fit, right? And then you redo the whole thing again, you dump it out and you put the rocks in, then you put the sand in, then you put the pebbles in, then you put the rocks in, and and then you put, I mixed that up again in my head. Then they actually dump water in there so that you see it's like not even full there. Like the illustration is everything flows around the big rocks. What would it look like in your own life to say actually gathering in worship is the big rock? That's the thing everything else flows around. And okay, I'm going to step on some idols here. Sorry. Not sorry. My wife and I have had to have a conversation that, hey, if Logan or Jazzy gets into sports and their sport has games on Sunday, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Coach, my kid's not going to be there on Sunday. Oh, well, that means they can't be first string, but they're not going to be anyway. Jazzy maybe. Logan's going to stumble over himself. I'm just saying. If there's something where it's like coding on Sundays, then he can win that, But I wouldn't either. Like, put me on the soccer ball teams, and people would be like, "Can we get that guy?" Actually, it's great that you're not going to be here Sundays. Please go away. But no, like. Again, this is not me trying to lay down a legalistic thing to get you to come to church on Sunday. This is me saying if that experience of worship together is actually as important to you as it was to the initial church, and somebody says, one off, okay, I get it. But hey, for the next 17 weeks we're going to be playing baseball on Sundays. Cool, my kid won't be there. Oh, but that means I actually don't really care what that means for the team. This is the priority. Or, do you see how I'm starting to step on some things here? Sorry. The Broncos are playing at 9 a.m. on a Sunday, at 11 a.m. on a Sunday. How easy is it for us to reorganize every part of our life, our finances, our family schedule, our eating habits to say that is what's happening? We're going to the game on Sunday. And yet we don't even think in the slightest that gathering as the church could or should be that important to us. Again, I'm stepping on some idols. I'm just going to do it, okay? I'm not saying this is a legalistic, if you miss church for the Broncos game, you're going to hell or stupid stuff like that. No. But I'm saying on the regular, if those other things are more important, you probably better check the heart and say, is this an idol? Yeah. Or is there something that's hurting that I need to look at? You could argue that, well, I experience God better in nature. I don't get anything out of church. Again, historically, biblically, the Bible does not know an individualized faith apart from the rest of the Christian brethren and sistren, so to speak. If anybody didn't need anybody else, it was Jesus. And yet that was his habit across the board. Did I skip the verse on, I think we're coming up to it here. Hold on. Oh yeah, it's right there. All right, we're good. I got a lot of talking in this. This is a big text section here on this. Oftentimes, if you look at Jesus' story, he's out in nature praying for the church. So he's not in church thinking about the mountains. He's in the mountains thinking about the church. That's what he died for. The people, again, not the program, not the building, not the etc. But at the same time, buildings hold people, programs organize us, and the Holy Spirit is a God of organization. Not saying everything we do as a church is, oh, you better prioritize that over your family and friends and etc. But if prioritizing worship isn't important, there's probably something that we got to look at in the heart. Here's another tip and trick for you. If you make prioritizing worship a habit, it probably can't start at 9:30 on Sunday morning when church starts at 10 a.m. If you're going to go on a camping trip, you don't wake up at 9 in the morning and go, ooh, I should probably pack, meal plan. My wife, we went camping a couple weeks ago. She brought along a portable toilet. It was the greatest thing I've ever had camping. It was a zip-up tent and this like actual plastic toilet you could sit on. She had to order that thing weeks in advance. We think about those kind of things. If it's Broncos Sunday, we think about how we're going to tailgate, what we're going to wear, where to get our makeup from and our crazy hair. You know, like if there's a concert coming up that we care about, we make sure we get our tickets. We make sure we've got the outfit for it. We make sure that we have plans. We drop maps on how to get there.
That's good.
If that thing is a big rock that is important to us, we not only prioritize it the day it happens, but you probably prioritize it leading up to it as well. So what does that look like? Well, it's actually kind of nice that the Jewish Sabbath was Friday night into Saturday, because you start preparing the night before. So on Saturday night, if you hold to a system of worship that's on a Sunday morning, on Saturday night, maybe you don't stay up till midnight watching a movie and eating sugar and ice cream. Maybe you don't work until 3 in the morning and go, man, whew, hope I wake up in the morning. They better serve Red Bull in the lobby. Like, maybe that doesn't actually mean prioritizing, right? Think about your relationship with your spouse or significant other. If there comes a day where you're like, oh, it's our anniversary. What'd you get me? And you're like, oh. Or you put a calendar notification, you're like, oh man, her birthday's tomorrow. I better run by Walmart, see if they have anything left. You laugh because we've done it, right? But if it's a priority to gather as the church, you don't start 10 minutes before you pull into the parking lot. You start the night before. You prepare your heart. There's a pastor friend of mine, Gary Underwood. He always puts out a post on Saturday on his social media feed. I'm preparing my heart tomorrow for what God is going to do at, and then he lists the church. And he does it so frequently that another one of our friends has started posting a few hours earlier than he usually does. I bet Gary Underwood is preparing his heart right now for church at, like, because he's like, I know that's what he's about to put out, right? If we're going to make it a habit, a rhythm of rest, then maybe it should happen Saturday night into Sunday. And maybe, just maybe, our Sabbath day would feel a lot more restful if we got the groceries out of the way and did the dishes before the Sabbath and cleared the deck so that on the Sabbath day, if your Sabbath includes Sunday and worship, you could just go, man, we could just chill today. Maybe God's inviting or speaking on our hearts to like invite someone to lunch. What if we had that margin to just let God speak and we weren't like, actually, God, if you would like to make an appointment with my watch schedule right here, then maybe I can get to you. But without margin, it's crazy how the Holy Spirit works when we let him. And it's crazy how we often are more prone to let him when there's margin. In the book of in the book of, where am I at now? Hebrews, thank you. Hebrews chapter 10, it says this, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have boldness to enter the sanctuary. So it's speaking about a specific heart attitude leading into worship. We're not just coming going, oh, hope the message doesn't suck today. Pastor, you're talking a little too long. We enter with boldness, a heart attitude that God is actually going to show up. Brothers and sisters, we enter the sanctuary through the blood of Jesus. He has inaugurated for us a new and living way through the curtain. Remember when we talked about the curtain being split? See how these things start to come together the more you dig into God's word? That is through his flesh. Now we're talking about communion. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, that's getting rid of the religion chains there and putting it back to God being the guy in charge. Let us draw near. Let us, not me, not let me, but let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed in pure water. Let us hold to the confession of our hope without wavering, since he who promised is faithful. Let us consider one another. Oh, notice that we're bringing back other people into the equation. Let us consider one another in order to prioritize, prepare, and provoke, there's some P words, love and good works, not neglecting to gather together, as some are, look at the word, in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So how do we prioritize gathering as the church? It comes to preparation. You say, this is the thing that I'm going to build my week around. Crazy, right? Well, I want to build my week around my work. I want to build my week around that trip to Disney. I want to build my week around getting to go out and ride my Harley finally and getting the rest of the world out of the way. The rhythm of rest that God created was not to rest from our work, but to work from a revitalized state of being that has had enough margin to prioritize what God is doing in our lives. Now, let's be honest for a second here. Church can be hard. Like, I just want to also eat the other elephant in the room and recognize that churches have hurt people. People have hurt people, right? And sometimes you don't want to gather as others. Like, I know real people that I love a whole awful lot that somebody spoke a bad word around them and they don't think they can come to church. They just can't be around that person. That's nothing against them. It hurt. They went to the place they thought they'd find healing, and instead they found hurt. I was watching an interview with Terry Crews earlier this week, all about his walk with faith, and he was talking about, I love Jesus, I love the Bible. And then he started talking about the church that he grew up in. He was like, I knew that pastor was hustling. But you didn't say anything against God's anointed. You didn't talk bad about him. And then later it came out that he was dealing drugs from the pulpit. He was sleeping around with all the people in the congregation. Like, people do it wrong, and they hurt people. Yeah, because they're people. So gathering together as a church can be painful. It can be a challenge. I've told this story in several different settings, but when our gods that aren't the little G ones, not the big one, get stepped on, it hurts, right? I know people who have stepped away from even this church because they think we're either too Republican or too Democrat or too this or too that. One of my favorite moments is when we were doing the launch for the relaunch, and we were doing these things out in the park. We had two of our most prominent members pull up almost at the exact same time into that park, and I couldn't have prepared it better. Their bumper stickers were like 12 inches apart. One on this bumper, one on this bumper. And one of them basically said, if you vote for that guy, you are the worst scum that ever existed. And the other one basically said, that guy's the worst scum that ever existed, and you better not follow him. Like, it was, you could not have more polarizing bumper stickers. And yet, those two men got out of their car, hugged each other, and said, I'm so excited for what God's doing in our midst. The church should be a place where we disagree agreeably. Yeah. It should be a place where your differences challenge me. It shouldn't be a homogenous, everybody is lockstep. And now we should believe certain things that are core to the faith, but all those other things that are lesser important should not be getting in the way. I still think every once in a while, because they're still in this building oftentimes on a Sunday, those two people, if they had the wrong conversation, would be at each other's throats. And yet they are sitting in worship, unified under a Savior that is far more important than broncos, donkeys, elephants, reds, blues, oranges. That's what church is meant to be. When we gather as the church, we learn to disagree agreeably. We learn that what we are aiming our lives towards is more important than the little side tracks that we try to take each other on. We learn to wrestle with people who maybe we don't like, but God's working on us in that. Or maybe someone doesn't like you, but you are finding healing in that. And don't get me wrong, the early church also had a lot of its struggles. Like half the gospel's like, all right, when you guys screw up like this, let me tell you how it works. You know, if you find that anyone has something against you, leave your gift at the altar. Go be reconciled with that person and then come back. That is the church. It's difficult. It's messy. It's people. It's also the plan God had to grow us into a community that learns to live like Him. I like to say church is glorious unity in our various diversity, or wonderful diversity. We all bring something different to the table. Paul said some are ears, some are eyes, Somebody out there is a spleen. Somebody else is a kidney. Somebody's a foot. Somebody's a hair. But we all have this different mixture of how God wired us. And together, you don't have to look like me. I don't have to look like you. But as long as we're going towards Jesus together, that creates this beautiful, healing community. Richard Foster, not Rick Foster here at the church, but they share the same name, says a striking feature of worship in the Bible is that people gathered in what could only be called holy expectancy. They believed they could hear Kol Yahweh, the voice of God. People gathered believing something was going to happen, could happen, truly would happen in powerful ways. So what does it look like to gather as the church? Well, it looks like prioritizing being in the midst of other people who maybe you don't see eye to eye with, but you're staring eyes up at Jesus. In our current American system, that typically happens on a Sunday. It's been that way for actually about 2,000 years. One of my pastor friends says, Sundays come around with alarming regularity. So, it's not one of those things that jumps out and surprises you like your anniversary. We're like, oh, I didn't know it was church this time. Does it always happen on Sundays? Oh, wow. But maybe there's something in your life that you need to reorganize to even make that happen. So here's my 2 takeaways from it. One is God designed you to rest. And out of that rest that has healed or worked towards healing your soul, to do good work. And Jesus and the teachings of the early disciples prioritized, meaning they oriented the rest of their week around gathering as the church. So maybe there's some things that you need to wrestle with in that. The person who won't work is lazy. The person who won't rest is disobedient. So what does it look like for us to reorganize our lives around rest and restoration, where we gather together and spend time with God and with the people of God, so that as we go back out, we don't stumble across the finish line each week and go, I did it. You'll find me on the couch for the next 17 hours. That's life. But instead, there's that glimmer of restoration so that you go back into the rest of your week going, I don't know what else I'm going to face, but I know who my team is. I know we're facing it together. I know I've been restored. I know God's got me. And I learned on that day of rest that He could handle the universe without me and without my exact permission. What? That's a different way to look at Sabbath. So we're going to go into our group time. And next week, we're going to talk about a few other things that are building out of this. But I'm going to end with where we started, the verse to wrestle with again this week. Be still. Stop fighting your own battles. Stop striving toward your own empire and know that I am God.